Hello, good morning or good day. So for today's PowerPoint presentation, we'll be looking into the nature of bureaucracy. So this is one of my presentation in one of my classes on the public administration program. So we have to look into bureaucracy, especially if you are working with the government, if you are working to public agencies or organizations, because bureaucracy is one major feature of a public administration organization or in the government. So we look into the following lesson objectives. So first, we have to define the basic concepts of bureaucracy, wherein we will be looking into the definition of bureaucracy. We also look into the developments of bureaucratic organizations, so the historical developments of how organizations today employ bureaucratic systems. We also look into the characteristics of bureaucracy. We have to distinguish the difference between bureaucracy and politics. We look into the functions of the bureaucracy. And lastly, we explain the characteristics and in the same time the behavior of the Philippine bureaucracy, because we're looking into into our own system, which am located today in the Philippines. Now, to start the PowerPoint presentation, may I cite a quotation from Thomas Paine. So, Thomas Paine is one of the founding fathers of the United States, and he's an American political theorist. So, he stated, "A government without a constitution is a power without a right." Now, this employs a democratic type of government, wherein in the democratic type of government, it employs a rule of law. So basically, we have the constitution, who has the supreme authority. It would not be an authority based on individuals or by men, but it basically reflects the rule of law. In a legal maxim, we have this Latin quote or phrase stating "Salus popula est suprema lex." The supreme law is the supreme law is the general welfare of the people. So laws are reflected to the interest of the people, to the commonweal, and laws will not reflect to the interest of only a few or the elites or some individuals. But as well, aside from his quotation connoting democracy, his quotation also connotes a principle called bureaucracy. So we will be looking into bureaucracy sooner or later. Now, what comes in your mind when we hear the word bureaucracy? So there are a lot of words or phrases or terminologies and concepts. So one would now connect it with a type of system. Also, we also connect bureaucracy as a philosophy. It is associated with politics. It is considered as a doctrine. Now, all of these terminologies are indeed correct. However, to further understand our notion of bureaucracy, we have to look into its formal definition. So, first, we have to look into the etymology. So, bureaucracy came from root words, which are French and Greek. Now, the first word would now be a French word bureau, which basically means desk or office. So one would now assume when they hear the word bureaucracy, they will now imagine rather, or visualize your office wherein there are people with paperworks, etc. And another root word would now be coming from the Greek word kratos, which posits rule or political power. So from the word bureaucracy, it basically means political power based on desk or office. Now, one would now assume that bureaucracy is a type of government that could be associated with our known types of the government, such as democracy, monarchy, aristocracy. However, when you try to look in some monarchy, for instance, United Kingdom, they employ bureaucracy type of systems. Rather, their government employs a bureaucratic type of system. In aristocrat governments, it's hard to identify. Let us state, for instance, some would now argue China, because the one who holds the power would now be the Communist Party. An aristocrat, or rather an authoritarian type of government, it's debatable, it's argumentable. They employ a bureaucratic type of system in their civil service. Or in democracy, United States consider itself as a democracy. However, it also employs bureaucratic system. In the Philippines, we consider ourselves as a republic democracy. However, our government employs a bureaucratic system. So, bureaucracy could be embedded in any type of government. It is basically a system, if one would now attach bureaucracy in that case. Now, to further understand more about bureaucracy, we look into several definitions. So I included 3 definitions. However, I'll be focusing on the second bullet form, the first definition, and the last definition. Now, bureaucracy, according to Blau, refers to a type of organization designed to accomplish large-scale administration tasks by systematically coordinating the work of many individuals. Now, when we look into the definition of Blau, it seems that it is quite, that bureaucracy is not unique in the sense that any organization can be defined in this way. Now, to further understand bureaucracy, what makes bureaucracy unique from other organizations would now be coming from the definition of Newton and Van Deth. So it's the last bullet form, wherein bureaucracy is considered to be, or rather bureaucracy is referred by Newton and Van Deth as a rational, impersonal, rule-bound, and hierarchical form of organizational structure set up to perform large-scale administrative tasks. What is unique and so special in the definition of Newton and Van Deth, it presents the 4 main elements of a bureaucracy, wherein it is rational, it is impersonal, rule-bound, and hierarchical. To further understand the definition of Newton and Van Deth, or bureaucracy in nature, we have to acknowledge one of its main proponents. So we have Max Weber. So Max Weber is a German sociologist and a political economist. His works is basically studied by those who are under the field of social sciences. So economics, sociology, political science, anthropology. So we study a lot on the works of Max Weber. He's the main proponent of the bureaucratic model. Now, Weber first to formally study bureaucracy, and his works led to the popularization of this term. So his work, bureaucracy, is basically coming from one of his published work entitled Economy and Society, wherein Weber described a lot of forms of organizations from your public administration, government, and businesses. Now, from the last words on the third bullet, we could now state that bureaucracy is not just employed in public agencies or in your government per se, but it is also employed in business organizations. Now, as a suggestion, Weber stated that the bureaucracy is the best form of organization because it maintains order, maximizes efficiency, and eliminates favoritism. So it's the most effective. Now, how Weber move into his conclusion, into his suggestion, we have to look into one of his theories as well. So Weber termed bureaucracy as the rational legal model. So this is actually his main suggestion coming from the theory on the tripartite classification of authority. Now, this tripartite classification of authority is one of the theories of Weber when it comes to organizations. So he classified that authorities, how do you call this one? That authority is classified into 3, and that authority is essential in organizations because authority will now regulate, control, and mold your organizations. So there are 3 types of authorities, wherein we have traditional authority. Authority is inherited. So this would be coming from, or rather as an example, the best example would now be during your prehistory, or rather your pre-human histories. So our institutions, your groups are, people would now form groups in terms of families. So from your families, so the one who is vested with authority would now be your father. Now the problem, or rather it could be considered as a problem. Now, by tradition, families, the authority in your family would now be vested from the oldest male sibling, or rather the male child of the family. So we call it in sociology as primogeniture. So the authority is inherited through the male. And that is an example of your traditional authority. Or another example would now be monarchies, wherein we have United Kingdom, we have Queen Elizabeth II, where the next in line in terms of the coronation would now be Prince Charles, or in Saudi Arabia, where in the PowerPoint we have your Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who is actually already responsible in the political affairs of your Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Then the second would now be in terms of charismatic authority. Now, authority is based on influence or personal qualities. Now, the best example would now be your religious founders, such as Jesus Christ. We have the Prophet Muhammad, the Prophet Buddha, wherein they will now magnetize or attract your audience that would now soon be your followers. But aside from your religious founders, in history we have Hitler. So Hitler, due to his charismatic attitude, his rhetoric, his speech, he gained a lot of followers, which would now later be his asset to become the Führer of Nazi Germany, of soon Nazi Germany, if we look into the narration of my story. Then also we have Martin Luther King, who was considered to be the leader of the civil rights movement in the United States. Now, lastly, Weber stated that Now, lastly, is we have your rational legal authority, wherein Weber stated that authority is based on societal rules and laws. So, an example of here would now be in terms of elections. In the Philippines, we elect our leaders, the one who will be holding your authority, such as your president, your vice president, based on election. Now, how does it become rational legal? Because it is based on societal rules and laws. Elections will be based from the Constitution in the Philippines, for instance, in our 1987 Constitution. Or another thing, it would be based on the Omnibus Election Code of the Philippines. Again, that would now be based on rules and laws. Or for instance, to those who are employed in the government. So once you are employed in the government, you want to be promoted, or how does your managers, your supervisors, your heads are in their position, because there is certain guidelines based in our civil service commission. So these are the following guidelines on how to be promoted, on how to be a supervisor. Again, your CSC, your memorandums, your depend orders will now be coming from rules and laws. Now, from among the three authorities, Weber stated that bureaucracy employs a rational legal model. So going back to my slide a while ago, so it maintain order, maximize efficiency, and eliminate favoritism. Now, because of rules and laws, bureaucracy is the best type of government. And to supplement it, may I just read the last bullet form according to Waters, that bureaucracy is based on the general principle of precisely defined and organized across the board competencies of the various offices, which are underpinned by rules, laws, or administrative regulation. Now, the next objective is we have to look into the developments of bureaucratic organizations. So how does bureaucratic organizations develop? How does our organizations are bureaucratic in nature? We have to look it into history. So there's a little bit of historical and anthropological approach in this next objective. So we have to look into the early human society. Now, during your early human society, we group ourselves based on our family. So there's a little bit of biological and anthropological function. Wherein, in that family, we could now state that there's already differentiation of tasks or functions. So an example would be your gender roles, because family is basically biological in nature and sociological actually. Yeah, makes sense. So we have the father, the mother, and your children. Now, from the members of that family alone, we could now state that there's already a function. The father, in Philippines, we call it as the haligi ng tahanan. He's the head of the family, while the mother would now be the ilaw ng tahanan. She will be the guiding factor of the family. However, it's sort of being dysfunction because of our contemporary times. But regardless of say, in early human societies, we could now see one element of bureaucratic organizations, wherein there's already been a differentiation of task. The father will serve as hunters, while the mothers will now be guiding within their household while the children will just play or help the mother. So already there's a differentiation of task and function. However, is it considered to be bureaucratic? Not yet, but this is already the start. Now in history, families will now group one with one another, or rather the families will now expand. They will now form a larger human collective or a larger human social group in the form of tribes, communities, and clans. Now from your families with large, we now the community has many members, there will be more functions and more tasks given. And as people will now grow, they will now expand, societies will now expand, there will be specialization of functions, and it will be hierarchical in nature. Now, to give you an idea how this works, we look into the medieval or feudal societies. Wherein, for instance, we have this structure in your medieval societies. So for instance, some individuals will now function as kings or nobles, or rather they will function as leaders in the form of kings and nobles. In the Philippines, we have the datus, or even your maharlikas. So we could now see there's already been another element of bureaucracy, which is now hierarchical in nature. So the specialization of functions, the differentiation of functions retain. However, it slowly becomes more hierarchical. So some would now function to protect the communities. They will be the knights. Some will now function in a religious function or in a religious purpose or philosophical purpose, wherein we have the clergies. They will also serve into function into economic, or rather, they will specialize in economic functions, wherein we have your merchants, and those merchants are divided according to their industry. So we have the blacksmith, we have carpenters, we have miners, then we have the serfs, and also the slaves. So is it bureaucratic then? Not yet. However, we already produce two main elements: specialization of functions, then it should be hierarchical. Now, as time progresses, people will now expand. Societies will now expand further up to they reach now the Industrial Revolution. What is so unique in the Industrial Revolution and quote unquote will now be the sparking line for human organizations to be more bureaucratic or to produce this organization called bureaucracy is because of two factors, wherein we have the advancement of technology. Due to the advancement of technology, there are more sectors that will now be produced. So from your simple sectors or functions such as warriors, there will be a lot more of functions because of the sectors produced. What do I mean? Due to technology, we have advancement in the field of engineering. So we now have a sector that will now function or specialize in engineering. There will now be sectors that will now functionize on accounting. There will now be functions that will now specialize in terms of finance. So when you look into departments, we have in your respective agencies, we have now departments that will now focus on engineering, on accounting, on finance, on general services. It's because of your industrial revolution. Then another thing, due to your industrial revolution, there will now be the age of reason and science. So from your age of enlightenment, we have a lot of philosophers that will now argue against, for instance, the common notion of your divine rights theory, that leaders are in their position because that is the will of God. Or basically, we have monarchs who are currently the leaders during those times because they believe on the right that they have been chosen by God. So no one could question that one. But the problem during those times is that your kings and queens are prone to fallibilities. They are prone to errors. So what is happening here is that reason is becoming more and more, rather it took place in terms of organization as well in sciences. So it tends to be impersonal. It's not already based on kings and queens. Now, due to these following reasons, advancement of technology and age of reason and science, we now lead to the formation of your bureaucratic organizations. And in the last box, or in the right illustration, organizations in this age incline to be rational. It is based on reason, impersonal. So your position, your qualification is based on merit and competencies. It should be rule bounded. That organization should be based on rules and it should be hierarchical. So those are the features of your bureaucratic organizations. Now, moving forward is we have the characteristics of bureaucracy. This actually came from the book of Leverisa. So in the book of Leverisa, Public Administration, the Business of Government, Leverisa provided a lot of characteristics based on the author. However, I chose the characteristic of whole because it's too holistic. So the following characteristics of bureaucracy are the following. It is a large and complex organization. Mostly all organizations are large and complex. Now, next would be a division of labor based on functional specialization. So, for instance, we have your organization, wherein your organization has a department of finance, department of accounting, um, general services. We have those who are involved in DPWH, wherein we have the structural engineerings. We have the engineer who will now focus on roads, etc. So there will now be a specialization. So they will now work as organs, just like a human body where in a human bodies we have the whole organism, then each and the living organism has respective organs and they have their several functions, wherein we have the heart, we have the brain, we have the lungs. So in an organization they function like that. A well-defined hierarchy and centralization of authority, wherein for instance you work in the government, you are an administrative aide, and possibly you have subordinates, or you have your upper positions wherein you have your supervisors, your heads, then your regional directors, then your secretaries. A system of rules covering the rights and duties of positional incumbents. So you have your job responsibility once you are employed in the government. And this would now be your task based on a guideline, based on the memorandums. A system of procedures for dealing with work situations. We have your operational guidelines, your implementing rules and regulations, an impersonal of interpersonal relations. You are based according to your merits, and promotion and selection of employment is based upon technical competence and merits. When the government posts hiring positions, they will now stated the minimum qualifications. So this would now include your educational qualification, your work experiences, your trainings. And once you are being evaluated in your work for promotion or retention, you have your evaluation tool, whether you will now uh, attain the necessary objectives of your organizations. So another important thing is we have to distinguish politics and bureaucracy. Now these two are working hand in hand. However, there should be a dividing line. Now in the government organization, so we could now classify the government into two organs, wherein we have the political organ, then your administrative organ. Now, the political organ of the government is we have the two branches of government, one of the two of the three branches of government, wherein we have your legislative, then executive. Now, this political organ, from the term political, is political in the sense because these two, in my own perspective, these two branches of government are political in nature. How can we define politics in this diagram? First, the legislative and executive are being elected by the people. So we could now check a political process which is now through elections. So there will now be means of power struggle because they are now competing for a political position. So legislative, you now be your senators and your executives. Rather your senators and your congressmen, sorry. Then for your executives, we have your president, then your vice president. Then another reason why this political organ is political is in the sense that these two institutions are presenting their own interests. So the clash of interests, for instance, when they debate a certain bill or law, or rather when they debate a certain bill, sorry, is there is now a political process. So they will now present their interest. So there will be a clash. So that is political in nature. So your political organ is basically its function is based on the functions of your branches. Wherein the legislative is to create laws, then your executive is to implement laws. Now after the political process, now who will now carry on the laws, for instance? It would be carried by your bureaucracy. So the function of the bureaucracy as an administrative organ is to carry out, administer the laws and policies. So they will now carry the laws crafted and implemented by the executive. Now, one disadvantage of your political organ is it changes. They don't enjoy this security of tenure. They changes. Now, what if the regime change? What if the people in the political organ change? And one concern in the government will not be the consistency of its operations when it comes to policies. Now, regardless to say whether if the legislative members are new, they will now ask for the help of the bureaucracy. This is now through one power of the legislative, which is now the inquire in aid of legislation. So they will now ask senior members of the bureaucracy, top level managers of the bureaucracy, because bureaucracy enjoys tenure. So they will now ask help for the bureaucracy in order to review, amend, or to change, for instance, a certain policy. Then that's the work of the bureaucracy. They will seek as policy advisors. And there should be a dividing line wherein bureaucracy should not be involved in politics. I will be stating that later. So here are the following functions of bureaucracy. So this has been stated by HEYWOOD. There are three functions of the bureaucracy. So first, the main, which I stated a while ago, which would now be in terms of administration. The core function of the bureaucracy is to carry out the laws and policies of the government. So it's basically in charge of the administering government business. Now, the second, as stated in the diagram, they will serve as policy advisors. So they are the chief source of policy information and advice available to government. So they will now offer policy advice to politicians and review policy proposals. However, are they involved with the crafting of policies? They will just serve as advisors. Regardless, they will now they don't like what are the legislators are doing. They don't have the powers because there's a dividing line. And lastly, in terms of political stability, bureaucracies are to provide a focus of stability and continuity within political system. Elected leaders, political organs might change. The members of the political organs might change. However, bureaucracies are consistent. So that is why in a lot of systems, in the bureaucracy, in any bureaucracy organizations of states, of countries, they have this main principle of political neutrality, which I'll be reinforcing later. So just to state, we have the following characteristics of the Philippine bureaucracy, which is deemed to be problematic. And although it's 1955, according to Corpus, we see that some of these problems are still consistent or redundant up to present day. So for instance, we know the vulnerability to nepotism. So appointment is more likely based on friends or relatives rather than based on competencies. Perpetration of the spoil system that would now lead to corruption. Apathetic public reaction to bureaucratic misconducts. We could now see that in the Philippine Constitution that a public office is a public trust. However, those who are prone to criticism would now just be members of the political organ. They're politicians. However, it seems that there is only few apathetic reactions to bureaucratic members. Availability of external means of correcting bureaucratic weaknesses. Survival of historical experience. Non-special typing of bureaucrats. Lack of independence from politics, an essential instrument of social change. Also, we have issues arising with the transformation of the Philippine bureaucracy. So again, though these are a lot of problems. However, how can we provide efficient and effective delivery of services in the bureaucracy if we could not identify the problems? So bureaucratic resistance to change, socio-economic, political, cultural, and ecological constraint to administrative change, and problems in the transfer of technology and adaptation. Now, an example of this three would now be due to the COVID crisis, a lot of government agencies have to improve their services without hindering our health measures is through the adaptation of technology. So it seems to be one major problem of the Philippine bureaucracy. For instance, the use of the smartphones, the use of your computers, of the internet, has been a challenge. So again, another problematic behavior of the Philippine bureaucracy is the following, and this has something to do with traditions and culture. The compadre system. Respect is accorded to social status rather than merit. Association with the elites. Sense of pity. We call it as awa. Sense of self-esteem. Amor propio. Sense of gratitude. Utang na loob. Sense of camaraderie. Pakikisama. Padrino system, then authoritarianism. Now, these are cultures embedded in the Philippine society and as well reflected in our bureaucracy. But the problem is that it already affects the the features that Weber provided. For instance, being impersonal and based on competencies. What if a member did something wrong, but because we could not get rid of him because he is being tenured, he will be losing all of his benefits. So there's a sense of pity. But based on your bureaucratic system, there's an element of the rule of law. So he violated some portions of the law, of the regulations conduct in his respective agency, or it should be based on competencies. He's not already being competent. So those are some issues. Then again, types of behavior in the Philippine bureaucracy. So conformity of policies. So we conform to a lot of policies, rules, and regulation, which is actually not bad. However, the adherence to conformity within the bureaucratic framework leads to red tape. So there are a lot of processes. For instance, procurement. So they will be checked by a lot of agencies from your COA, from your respective agencies, the accounting offices, which is not bad because it is now a good mechanism in order to check if there's anomalies involved. But the problem is it leads to red tape. It's too process oriented. So for instance, projects that can be implemented faster are tend to be delayed or slowed down because of the conformity to policies. Instead of you could now build infrastructure projects immediately, you have to wait for the engineer, wait for the go signal, wait for the reports. Or in terms of the medicines, however, we could now see your policymakers are acknowledging this type of problems and they now make innovative ways on how to solve the issues regarding the tape. Preference towards continuity and routinization. So there's too much emphasis on specialization, hence there is a general preference for the bureaucrats to maintain the status quo in the organization. So this has been the status quo. Let's just adhere to it. But just to add a side comment, this has been a critic by Karl Marx, although this might be a very unconventional point of view. However, bureaucracy focus on specialization. So since you are an accountant, you'll be assigned to the accounting office, which would now lead to sort of your being alienated by your freedom. Karl Marx stated that supposedly man should be enjoying his freedom. So you could be a fisherman in the morning, you could be a farmer in the afternoon, you could be a lawyer in the evening. So you are now practicing your freedom to do what you like. However, in a bureaucracy type of government, you are being alienated on that specialization. You are treated like robots. So that is one thing that you must also look into. Loss of self-direction and self-assertion. Very similar actually in the example I given. And lastly would now be political supportive. So this is intended for the Filipinos because we have support in the political party in power, which is nothing wrong if we look into the bureaucratic power. It's in the organ relationship between your administrative organ and your political organ because you should be reciprocal. Uh, However, the problem with your Philippine politics is what if the political party change? So if the party change, then it would now affect on how your bureaucratic organization will now deliver its services towards the people. And there should be a dividing line between politics and the bureaucracy, which is been embedded by your civil service commission, wherein civil servants should avoid in partaking in partisan politics, especially if you have that permanent or plantilla positions. So to end my discussion is from Mahatma Gandhi, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. So thank you. Here are my following references. So once again, please have a good day and remember to enjoy life.